I walked into my childhood home on New Year's Eve, with snow still clinging to my coat, when my dad looked straight at me and told a group of strangers that I was nothing more than technical support for my sister. He said it the way someone brushes lint off a sleeve. Casual, thoughtless, cruel. The room was warm from the fireplace, but I remember feeling a cold strip of air slide along my shoulders, as if the house itself had exhaled and pushed me out. Someone laughed. I do not even know who it was. Maybe one of the investors my sister had invited. Maybe one of the neighbors liked free champagne more than the truth. My sister stood near the foyer staircase in her sequined dress, smiling like she had been waiting for that moment. She lifted her glass just a little, and I watched the light catch the rim. It looked sharp enough to cut. Dad talked over me before I could answer the man who had asked about my work. He told him I helped my sister with her projects. Helped. As if the years I spent building something from nothing had been an after-school hobby. As if my name had never been on the walls of my small apartment in Somerville, where sticky notes covered every cabinet door while I chased the idea that, eventually, became my company. I did not feel anger at first. It was more like an old bruise being pressed by a familiar hand. Before I go any further, let me pause. I always like knowing what people are doing when they listen to stories like this, especially ones that begin the way mine did. It makes the world feel a little closer, a little more human somehow. If you feel like it, share it later in the comments. When this night happened, I was standing in that room trying to breathe through the sting of being erased in front of people who celebrated my sister as if she were the only Whitmore who had ever achieved anything. Dad kept talking. He liked taking over conversations the way some people like taking over rooms. He said things like, "She is good with computers," and "she helps her sister." Every word chipped away at the space around me. I could feel the walls leaning in. I could hear my heartbeat in my ear. The carpet swallowed the sound of everything except my refusal. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself with a speech. I simply said, "I will not lie about my work." The sentence hung there. No one in that room had expected me to contradict him. For a moment, everything froze. Even the music in the other room felt muffled. Dad's eyes narrowed. He set his drink down. My sister tilted her head like she was watching a scene she had wanted to see her entire life. The man who had asked me the questions smiled awkwardly and looked at his shoes. People shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Then Dad stepped toward me with that familiar, controlled rage he used whenever I forgot my place. He said, "If you cannot respect this family, you can leave." I said nothing. Respect had always meant silence in that house. Silence and shrinking. But I did not shrink. David's voice cracked through the room louder than the music. "Get out or I call the cops." He reached for the door and swung it open. The cold rushed in. My sister clapped once, sharply, like it was the final cue of a play she had directed. I remember bending to pick up my coat. I remember the weight of the fabric, the smell of snow on wool, the strange steadiness in my legs. I looked at my dad and said goodbye. No anger, no tears, just goodbye. A word that felt heavier than the night sky outside. I stepped out into the cold, and the door shut behind me. The lock clicked. It sounded like a small piece of metal, but it felt like a verdict. The sky above Greenwich was lit by the glow of early fireworks from the sound. I walked down the icy steps, my breath forming pale clouds in the air. I did not know what would unfold in the next few minutes, but I knew something had shifted inside me. Whatever part of me had tried to belong to that house had dissolved in the cold. I reached my car, sat inside, and rested my fingers on the steering wheel. I watched the windows of the house where silhouettes moved as if nothing had happened. I almost drove away. Almost. Then I felt my phone buzz. It was 12 o'clock in the morning. My sister's name lit up the screen. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Her voice came through cracked and breathless. "Eliza, what did you do?" "David is having a complete breakdown. Mom is yelling. People are leaving. The police just pulled up in front of the house." "What did you do?" I stared at the windshield where flakes were melting into thin lines. I felt a strange calm settle in my chest. Not satisfied, just clarity. The kind that arrives when you finally stop pretending you are smaller than you are. I said I did not do anything except tell the truth. She started to say something, but her voice shook too much to make sense of the words. The only thing I could understand was fear. Not fear of me, fear of what truth does when it finally stands on its own feet in a house built on denial. She asked again, "What did you do?" And I said, "I will talk when I am ready." Then I hung up. I sat there listening to the muffled sounds of shouting coming from inside the house, the distant crack of fireworks, the approaching footsteps on ice. I saw the reflection of blue and red lights sliding across the hood of my car. I did not turn the engine on. I did not move. I had spent 31 years trying to earn a place in that family. Tonight, they handed me the freedom to stop trying. The snow kept falling, soft and steady, like it had all the time in the world. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I did too. I took a slow breath and exhaled into the quiet of my car. The night was not over. It was only changing shape, becoming something else. Something I had not expected when I stepped onto that porch. Something that would unravel every lie they had built and every truth I had buried to survive. Outside, the flashing lights grew brighter. I heard a door open. I heard someone call out for the man who had called emergency services. I heard my sister shouting that she did not understand what was happening. Their voices blended into the night until they were only noise. I stayed still. The truth has a sound when it finally arrives. It does not roar. It does not scream. It lands quietly, like snow, but it changes everything it touches. I did not know what the next hour would bring. I only knew this. I was done apologizing for existing. I was done making myself smaller, and whatever was unfolding behind those walls was the beginning of something they never saw coming. The house that had erased me was about to learn what happens when the invisible daughter finally stops disappearing. I lifted my eyes toward the falling snow and waited for the moment that would change all of us. The officers were already walking toward the front door, and my story had only just begun. I remember sitting there in my car, watching their silhouettes move across the porch, when a strange heaviness settled in my chest. Not fear, not worry, something older than that. A memory rising from a place I had spent most of my life trying to quiet. The kind of memory that makes you realize nights like this never start on this. Nights, they happen. They start years earlier in the smallest moments. Moment you think you have forgotten, until they come back and fit into place like pieces of a puzzle you did not know you were building. The truth was, I knew that moment on the porch was inevitable. Maybe not the police lights or the shouting or the snow melting on my windshield, but the feeling of being pushed out of a house that was never truly mine. It had been growing for years, women into the rhythm of my family life, long before I turned 31, or built a company, or filed a patent with my name on it. When I was a child, the Whitmore house had its own weather system, one that never matched the seasons outside. In winter, the rooms were warm but felt cold. In summer, the sunlight looked filtered, as if the windows only allowed in the parts that did not disturb anything. Everything in that house was curated, impressive when guests were around, quiet and polite when we were alone. My family liked order. They liked predictability. They liked the illusion of peace more than peace itself. I learned early that peace meant silence. My sister never had to learn that rule. She spoke her mind without consequence. If she said something sharp or careless, it was brushed away with, "She is expressive," or "She just has a strong personality." When I said something similar, even gently intense, Dad did not need to say anything. The disappointment on his face did the work for him. I used to watch my sister take up space with ease. She filled rooms with her voice, her laugh, her demands. I used to think she had been born with a secret permission slip I never received. Something invisible that said the world would bend for her. I spent years waiting for mine to arrive. By the time I reached high school, I had already mastered the art of shrinking. I avoided talking about classes I excelled in because Dad always said pride made people look foolish. I remember once coming home with a first-place ribbon from a regional science competition. My teacher had encouraged me to bring it home and share it with my family. I left it in my backpack after Dad said that kind of thing does not matter for real life. And Mom said your sister just had a stressful day. Let her have the attention tonight. That ribbon stayed folded in the bottom of that bag until I left for college. In college, I thought things would change. I imagined that distance would loosen whatever grip that house had on me. I chose a school in Massachusetts because it felt far enough to breathe. For a while, it worked. I felt lighter. I felt visible in ways I had never felt before. Professors encouraged my ideas. Classmates asked my opinion. I learned how to speak without waiting for someone to decide if my voice was appropriate. But the rhythms of my family followed me, even when I tried to outrun them. Adam called once during my sophomore year. He asked how school was going, but not in a curious way, more like an audit. I told him about a research project I had been invited to join. He hummed and said, "Your sister is thinking about starting a business. Maybe you can help her with the technical parts." It was the same message as always. Whatever I did was only real if it supported her. I did not correct him. I never did. I think about that now and wonder how many times in my life I mistook survival for respect. In 2019, the year I began working on the earliest version of the algorithm that would later shape my entire life, everything in me wanted to celebrate. I had just cracked a small but critical part of the pattern recognition model. It felt like discovering a new doorway in a house you thought you knew. I called Mom because for some reason I still believed she might be proud. She listened, said, "That sounds great, but your sister has an interview tomorrow, and she is nervous. Try not to overwhelm her with technical stuff when you come home." I remember standing in my kitchen in Somerville, with my phone pressed to my ear, staring at a stack of research papers on the counter. I whispered, "It is okay. I can tell you another time." And she said, "Thank you, sweetheart." She meant well. She always meant well. But good intentions do not erase a lifetime of being told to dim your own light. I learned to swallow my words. I learned to offer my accomplishments like they were inconveniences. I learned to be small in a family that rewarded loudness. Between 2019 and 2021, as my work grew and my confidence quietly tried to keep up, the gap between who I was at home and who I was outside widened. At the lab, I was respected. At home, I was tolerated. At the lab, my ideas mattered. At home, they were distractions. Dad rarely asked what I was building. Mom said science was wonderful, but she did not understand any of it. My sister told people I fixed her devices, because that was easier to explain. I still tried, though. I still showed up for birthdays and dinners and holidays. I still let my sister talk over me. I still flinched when Dad sighed in that way he did when he wanted the conversation to move on. I still apologized for things that were not my fault. I still fit myself into the shape they recognized. One night in early 2021, I came home for a family dinner and someone asked what I was working on. I opened my mouth and Dad cut in, saying she is busy with her computer projects, but let her sister tell you about the new partnership she is exploring. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it lodged itself in my memory like a shard of glass. The way the table turned toward my sister, the way she smiled, the way I felt myself fold inward again. I started to understand that my family did not love the version of me that existed outside that house. They loved the quiet one, the obedient one, the helpful one, the one who did not make anyone uncomfortable with ambition or achievement or truth. They loved the version of me that did not exist anymore. The shift did not happen all at once. It happened in small realizations scattered across those years. The feeling of coming home and knowing the door might open, but I would still be outside. The way my sister's accomplishments were displayed in frames along the hallway, while mine lived in drawers. The way Dad introduced me to people as good with computers, even after I received grant funding most researchers my age only dreamed of. By the end of 2021, I had grown tired, not angry. Anger would have meant believing things could change. Tired meant accepting what was true. My family valued order. My existence disrupted that order. They wanted harmony above honesty. I had learned to give them that for decades, but something inside me knew I could not keep doing it forever. That quiet fracture is what led to everything that happened next. It is what shaped the night my dad locked the door behind me. It is what shaped the calm I felt sitting in my car while the police lights washed over the driveway. It is what shaped the decision I made long before New Year's Eve, long before the shouting, long before the truth finally rose to the surface. I think that is what people misunderstand about moments like the one I had tonight. They imagine the breaking point as a single explosion, a sudden rupture. But most fractures start as hairline lines running beneath the surface of a life. Lines you ignore because you think they will fade. Lines you pretend are shadows. Lines that deepen each time you swallow a truth to protect someone else's comfort. By the time the fracture becomes visible to everyone else, it has been growing for years. Sitting in my car watching the falling snow, I realized I had been living with that fracture my entire life. It had simply taken 31 years and one locked door for me to finally acknowledge it. The officers were on the porch now. I heard a voice call out a greeting, muffled by the winter air. Inside the house, someone shouted something I could not make out. My sister's voice rose and fell like she was trying to corral a storm she never saw coming. And all I could think was that the girl I used to be, the one who tried so hard to be small, would not have recognized the woman sitting in that car now. The one who refused to lie. The one who walked away. The one who had finally stopped shrinking. I let out a slow breath. Snowflakes drifted across the windshield and melted as soon as they touched them. Glass. For the first time in my life, I did not wonder what my family wanted from me. I wondered what I wanted for myself. The night was still unfolding. The truth was still moving through the house like a cold wind, but the fracture had already opened. There was no going back to the version of me they preferred. I watched the porch light flicker and thought of all the years I had spent learning how to be quiet in a family that only loved the quiet parts of me. That chapter of my life was ending. Another one was beginning, whether any of us were ready or not. I stayed still and let the silence settle. The next part of the night was coming, and I knew it would not wait for me to gather my thoughts. Snow kept drifting across the windshield as I sat there, letting the silence settle, and the next part of the night waited just beyond the edge of my breath. But my mind, stubborn as ever, pulled me backward instead of forward, back to the place where all of this really began. Not in a living room on New Year's Eve, not with the police lights or the shouting or the cold. It began in a cramped lab in Somerville, where the hum of old radiators and the flicker of overhead bulbs felt more like home than the Whitmore house ever had. The Carver Institute sat on a narrow street lined with brick buildings and street lamps that buzzed softly whenever it rained. The lab was wedged on the third floor, a space that always smelled faintly of coffee, printer ink, and whatever experimental food someone microwaved at 2 a.m. We worked odd hours. We worked long hours. Most nights, the January cold seeped through the windows so sharply that we kept spare sweaters draped over the backs of our chairs. No one complained. That lab felt like ours. Even when the roof leaked, or the heat cut out, or the ancient elevator stalled. Between floors. In 2019, I was 26 and had just been accepted into a research partnership focused on early diagnostic modeling. It sounded more complicated than it felt. At its core, we were trying to teach computers how to read early signs of illness, the same way a seasoned clinician can spot something subtle. Not magic, not miracles, just patterns hiding in places most eyes cannot see. I liked the work because it was patient. It rewarded persistence more than brilliance. You could stare at a problem for weeks, convinced it hated you. Then one night, something shifted, and the answer finally stepped into the light. I made a lot of mistakes in those early months. I once mislabeled a data folder and wiped out 2 weeks of pre-processing. I dropped my laptop and shattered the corner of the screen. I spilled a cup of cold brew so thoroughly across my desk that the stain lived under the keyboard for the rest of the year. But the work kept calling me back, even when I felt overwhelmed, even when I felt underqualified, even when my family asked me when I was going to get a real job. My mentor, Dr. Elena Martinez, had a voice that could cut through the loudest room without ever sounding harsh. She always wore her hair pinned up, always drank tea from a chipped ceramic mug, and always believed that good research came from curiosity rather than ego. One night, when I was struggling with a particularly stubborn modeling issue, she pulled a chair next to me and said the only real breakthrough in science is learning how to keep going when the work embarrasses you. I remember writing that down on a sticky note and taping it to my monitor. It is still there in my apartment, faded at the edges. By early 2020, we had the first rough structure of the algorithm that would eventually become neural thread, though that name came much later. At the time, it was just Model V14, or Revised Core Pattern Test 6. Not glamorous, not impressive, but it worked just enough to keep us chasing the next version. We ran simulations at odd hours, tweaking parameters, testing image sets, celebrating tiny victories like they were revelations. I loved that period of my life. I loved walking home from the lab in the early morning with my hair smelling like machine oil and my hands sticky from too many energy bars. I loved the glow of porch lights in Somerville as the world began to wake up. I loved the quiet pride of knowing I was building something, even if no one in my family ever asked about it. My sister called occasionally during those years, usually when she needed help fixing something. She never asked what I was working on. She never asked how I was doing. She always sounded busy, as if every conversation was a favor she was granting me by picking up. I once tried to tell her about the early detection accuracy we had achieved that week. She said, "That sounds good, but can you help me with a proposal for a potential investor?" Then she talked for the next 15 minutes about her travel plans. I do not think she meant to be dismissive. She just grew up believing her world mattered more. In the spring of 2020, I filed the first provisional patent application. I had been encouraged by Dr. Martinez and 2 colleagues who believed that my specific structure for pattern segmentation was unique enough to protect. Filing it was terrifying. I had never put my name on something that was official before. I kept checking the timestamp on the confirmation email, like it might disappear if I blinked too hard. I saved everything. Every draft, every note, every email. Not because I expected anyone to challenge me one day, but because I was proud. That was new. Pride felt like a foreign emotion in my mouth, but I held on to it anyway. At home, though, none of that mattered. The few times I visited during those years, Dad still introduced me as good with computers. Mom still said she wished I had chosen something easier to explain. My sister still filled the space with her ambitions and her charm, while I stayed quiet, so the night would stay peaceful. I had learned that the cost of speaking was often higher than the value of being heard. In late 2020, a small opportunity came through a nonprofit healthcare group that wanted to explore early screening tools. Dr. Martinez asked me to take the lead on the presentation. I was nervous. I was excited. I practiced for days. When I mentioned it to my family over Thanksgiving dinner, my sister changed the subject to talk about a new luxury pilot program she was pursuing. Dad nodded politely, then asked if I could look at his laptop because it had been running slowly. Mom said she hoped I would not get too stressed about work because stress made it difficult. I remember driving back to Massachusetts that night with the taste of disappointment thick in my throat. I rolled down the window on the interstate just to feel the cold air hit my face and remind me I was still real. 2021 was the year everything accelerated. Neural thread, as we later named it, started showing promising consistency rates. We secured a research extension. I was invited to present at a regional conference. My sister called that same week to say she was considering a new product line and needed help writing the technical description. I offered to guide her through it. She asked if I could just do it instead. She said it would only take me a few minutes. It took me 3 hours, and I never got a thank you. In April of that year, my family asked if I could advise on a concept for a potential medical technology expansion they were discussing for Whitmore Industries. They made it sound casual, almost like a family favor. I said yes, I should not have. But old habits die slow. I thought maybe this time it would feel different. Maybe they would finally see the work I had done. Maybe sharing it would bring us closer. It did not. The first meeting I attended with them took place in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. My sister did most of the talking, presenting slides I had helped her organize. When questions turned technical, she gestured toward me and said, "My sister helps with the computer parts." I felt the old familiar shrinking inside my chest. I answered the questions anyway, but I did it gently, careful not to make her look unprepared. Careful not to make Dad look irritated. Careful not to seem too proud. After the meeting, Dad said, "Good job," in the same tone he used when I set the table, correctly, as a child. Then he applauded my sister for leading the entire conversation. She accepted the praise easily. She always did. I went home that night and opened my patent files again. I read every timestamp twice. I reminded myself that whatever happened in that conference room, my work belonged to me. Not them, not the company, not my sister. Me. In the summer, I received a call from our research coordinator confirming the next stage of development for the algorithm. It meant long hours. It meant high stakes. It meant real progress. I was ecstatic. I wanted to share the news. But when I messaged my sister, she said she was busy preparing for a big presentation. Dad did not respond. Mom sent a heart emoji and asked if I could come home soon because my sister was feeling overwhelmed and needed support. I did not reply to that message for 2 days. That was when I began to understand that supporting my family had become a one-way street. Whatever I gave disappeared into the landscape of their expectations. No acknowledgement. No reciprocity, just more requests. By the end of 2021, I had made a quiet decision. I would still help the family company when they asked, but I would not give them the core of my work. I would not hand over the intellectual property I had spent years building. I would not shrink far enough to fit inside the version of me they preferred. I told myself boundaries could exist without conflict. I told myself my family would respect them. I told myself they would never try to take something from me that did not belong to them. I was wrong about that. But back then, I still believed it. Back then, I still hoped. Back then, the fracture was there, but it had not split open yet. In the fading glow of the streetlights outside my apartment in Somerville, I sat at my desk in those final days of 2021 with a folder full of documented work, time-stamped emails, provisional patents filed in my name, and a quiet certainty that I had built something real. Something meaningful, something bigger than any of them knew. I had no idea then how much they would try to take it. I had no idea how far my sister would go. I had no idea how much of the coming years would be shaped by the fact that the work they never wanted to see would become the very thing they could not live without. 2023 arrived quietly for me. I started it like I started most years, sitting at my small kitchen table in Somerville, with a cup of black coffee and a notebook full of goals. I wrote more for structure than certainty. The lab was moving into a new testing phase. My schedule was packed. My sister barely called anymore except when she needed something technical. My dad left short messages asking if I could help her prepare for investor meetings. Mom sent reminders that family dinners were still on Sundays and that it would mean a lot if I came. I rarely did. In early February, my sister asked me to join her for a meeting at a downtown Boston office space they were temporarily leasing. She said it was casual and that she only needed some quick clarification on a few concept slides. I believed her. I always believed her, at first. I grabbed my laptop, printed a few diagrams I thought might help, and took the evening train into the city. When I walked into the conference room, the air felt too still. Like everyone had been waiting for me. There were 3 men in suits I had never seen before, the kind who wore expensive watches and looked like they divided their time between boardrooms and golf courses. My sister lit up when she saw me, but not with the warmth of someone greeting family. It was the tight, calculated smile of someone unveiling the final puzzle piece in a presentation. She walked toward me, placed a hand lightly on my arm, and said, "This is my technical assistant. She helps me refine the development framework." The words slid through the air like a thin blade. Technical assistant. Not a collaborator. Not a researcher. Assistant. One of the men nodded at me politely, while my sister clicked through slides she had clearly rehearsed. I stood behind her chair and watched as she explained early detection accuracies, pattern interpretation, and diagnostic projections that I'd spent years refining in that cramped Somerville lab. She spoke confidently, even though I knew she understood only the surface of what she was describing. When questions turned complex, she glanced up at me and said, "She can go deeper into that if you want." They asked, I answered. She took the credit. When the meeting ended, my sister wrapped her coat around her shoulders and said, "You did great, thank you." I wanted to correct her. I wanted to ask why she introduced me that way. I wanted to know when she started telling people the algorithm was hers. But Mom had always taught me to wait until we got home before addressing uncomfortable things. And my dad always taught me that correcting someone in front of them, guests, was rude. Old habits are hard to break. A week later, my sister called and asked me to meet her and my dad at the Whitmore Industries downtown office. She said it was important. I almost did not go. I should not have gone, but I still wanted to believe my family would do the right thing if they only understood how much work I had poured into this project. So I took the train again, rehearsing what I would say, telling myself this was simply a misunderstanding. My dad was already seated when I walked in. He always liked to give the impression he had been waiting a long time, even when he had arrived minutes earlier. My sister sat beside him, her arms crossed and her expression serious. "There is something we need from you," my sister said. She slid a stack of documents across the table. I recognized the format immediately. A non-disclosure agreement. Thick. Dense. Written by someone who had memorized corporate jargon the way I memorized algorithms. She said it was standard. She said the company needed protection. She said this was family, and it would be irresponsible to move forward without putting everything in writing. He nodded in approval. His silence was a form of pressure all its own. The room felt tighter with every passing second. I picked up the document and skimmed the first few pages. It was broad. Too broad. There were clauses that implied ownership of any overlapping ideas. There were lines that constrained how I could speak about my own work. It did not feel protective. It felt possessive. I looked up and asked why this was necessary. My sister gave a small sigh like she was tired of explaining. Because investors want assurance that you are not going to take the work and bolt. You know how things go in tech. People get greedy. Greedy. The word hit harder than I expected. I had never asked them for anything. I had stayed quiet my entire life so they could have peace. And now the assumption was that I would betray them. Right then, Mom walked in. She rarely visited the office, but she appeared at perfect times to apply gentle pressure. She placed a hand on my sister's shoulder and smiled at me softly. "Sweetheart," she said, "this is routine. Families protect each other. This is how we keep things safe." Safe for who? I wondered. Mom stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Your sister is carrying a lot. It would mean a lot if you made this easy." There it was, the request beneath the request. Make yourself small again. Do not cause trouble. Be the peaceful one. Sign the papers and let everyone breathe. I felt the old shrink inside my chest. That familiar collapse. I could hear the voice that ruled my childhood whisper, "Just sign it and keep that peace. It is only paperwork." So I signed. I signed because I trusted the people in that room. I signed because I did not want to be the source of conflict. I signed because I believed they would never use it against me. I was wrong. A month later, I was invited to another meeting. This time it was larger, a mix of internal department heads and outside partners. My sister stood at the front of the room with a clicker in her hand. She wore a white suit that made her look like the centerpiece of the entire operation. I sat in the back row, quiet as always. She began the presentation by describing a breakthrough in early detection, modeling. My breakthrough. She showed diagrams I recognized immediately, layouts I had created, color-coded pathways I spent long nights fine-tuning. She delivered the presentation smoothly, confidently. She told them the model had been conceptualized in-house by Whitmore Industries, under her leadership. Not a single word about the lab. Not a single word about my team. Not a single word about me. I felt my breath thin out. I waited for her to mention my involvement. She did not. I waited for her to acknowledge my contributions. She did not. She only paused once to adjust a slide, the very slide that held the mirrored structure I had discovered in the winter of 2019. Seeing it under her name felt like being erased in slow motion. The applause at the end of her presentation sounded distant. People congratulated her. Someone said this could change everything. My dad hugged her and told her he was proud. Mom wiped a tear and said she always knew her daughter was destined for something extraordinary. No one looked at me. After that meeting, I walked out of the building and sat on a bench near the street. Cars passed. People talked. The city moved around me like nothing had happened. But something had. Something quiet and devastating. That was the moment helping my family stopped feeling like duty and started feeling like erasure. By the time the bus pulled up, I had already made a silent promise to myself. I would document everything. I would save every file. I would print every email. I would timestamp every decision. I would keep a detailed log of every instance where my work appeared under someone else's name. Not to use them against them. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew now, with a clarity that chilled me, that my family did not see me as a collaborator. They saw me as an accessory. In the weeks that followed, I watched my sister present my ideas to more groups. I watched my dad beam with pride. I watched Mom encourage her. I watched decision-makers nod approvingly as she spoke, and I sat there, shrinking in a room that grew smaller each time she took more credit than she deserved. One afternoon in early summer, I opened my laptop and created a folder titled Proof. Inside it, I stored my original diagrams, drafts, timestamped code snippets, emails from Dr. Martinez, provisional patent confirmations, and detailed notes from every meeting. It was the first boundary I had ever set. Quiet, invisible, but mine. That folder became my anchor. Each time my sister introduced me as her assistant, each time my dad ignored my voice, each time my mom smoothed over tension by placing a hand on my arm and whispering, "Let it go, sweetheart," I added another file to the folder, and the fracture that had lived beneath the surface for years continued to spread, slow and steady, waiting for the day it would finally rise to the surface. I did not know yet that the surface would be the front porch of my childhood home, under New Year lights, with police officers approaching my dad, and my sister calling me desperate for an out, answer she already feared. But the path to that night began here, in these quiet acts of erasure. The folder of proof kept growing, and by the time autumn arrived, I carried it with me like a second spine, thin but unbreakable. Thanksgiving crept closer in the way holidays always do when you are dreading them. Slow at first, then suddenly, right at your doorstep, whether you are ready or not. I told myself I would not go that year. I told myself I did not owe my presence to people who pretended not to see me. But old habits, especially the Whitmore kind, had a way of pulling me back. Thanksgiving in our family was always an orchestrated event. My dad liked the table set with the same china Grandma used. Mom fussed over centerpieces. My sister floated from room to room, greeting guests like she owned the air they want. Breathed. The house smelled like roasted turkey and citrus glaze. Laughter echoed from corners where people stood holding crystal glasses. The whole thing looked like a magazine spread. Perfect, shiny, curated. I walked in carrying a dessert I had baked myself. Something simple, a pumpkin loaf, because it was the only recipe I knew by heart. My sister glanced at it and said, "Cute," before turning back to her conversation. Mom kissed my cheek, but her eyes darted around the room as if making sure I had not. Brought tension with me. He asked how the project was going, but did it in that tone that suggested he already needed the conversation to be over. I said it was progressive. He nodded once, then walked away before I could say more. People arrived in waves. My sister positioned herself near the fireplace, where the lighting was flattering, and the photographer Mom hired every year could catch her from the right angle. When it came time for introductions, he stood beside her and said, "This is our pride and joy, leading our next chapter at Whitmore Industries. She is extraordinary." The room clapped politely. She blushed modestly, even though she had known this moment was coming. When it was my turn, Mom placed a gentle hand on my back and nudged me forward, saying, "This is Eliza. She is still figuring out her path." She said it kindly, as though the softness made the words less diminishing. Still figuring out her path. I was 31. I had a patent. I had a working model being evaluated by research committees. But in that room, none of it existed. My sister added she is brilliant with computers. She helps me sometimes." The guests smiled at me with the kind of pleasant indifference people give to someone they assume is unimportant to the main story. I felt myself shrinking again, the way I always did in that house. Not because anyone forced me to, just because that was the role I had been assigned long before I understood I could refuse it. Dinner conversations swirled around me, deals being discussed, vacations being planned, achievements being praised. When people asked my sister about the year she had, she beamed and told them things she had done, things she had not done, and things I had done, but she had claimed. When people asked her how she learned so much about the algorithm she had presented to investors, she said I just pick things up naturally. It is like a gift. No one asked me anything, not even Mom. Every time I tried to enter a conversation, someone spoke louder over me or shifted the topic in a way that pushed me aside. I felt invisible in a room full of people who claimed to know me. Toward the end of dinner, when dessert plates were being cleared, Mom leaned close to me and whispered, "Sweetheart, try not to be so intense tonight. You make people uncomfortable when you focus too much on your work. Just relax. Let things flow." I stared at the flickering candles on the table. The melted wax dripping down the sides looked steadier than I felt. I excused myself and walked out the back door into the cold. The yard was quiet except for the rustle of leaves in the wind. I stood there with my breath rising in little white clouds and felt the familiar ache that came with being erased in plain sight. Inside, laughter spilled from the living room. My sister's voice floated above the rest. Mom's soft hum of approval wrapped around her words. My dad clinked glasses with someone. The warmth they shared never seemed to reach me. I walked to my car and sat with my hands gripping the steering wheel. Something inside me finally snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly. A small, silent break that told me I could not keep living in the shadow of a family who needed me to be lesser so they could shine brighter. I drove away before dessert was even served. 2 days later, after replaying every moment of that night in my mind, I called a number a colleague at the lab had given me months earlier, a lawyer named Daniel Price, someone who specialized in intellectual property rights. I hesitated before dialing. I had never spoken to a lawyer about anything in my life. Doing so felt like betrayal, even though I was the one who had been betrayed. Daniel met me in his office in Cambridge. It was a modest space, with shelves stacked to the ceiling and a window that overlooked a narrow alley. He greeted me with a calm smile and asked what brought me in. I told him everything. Not in a neat, rehearsed way. The words came out tangled, emotional, heavy. I told him about the meetings, the presentations, the NDA my family pressured me into signing, the way my sister had stepped into rooms holding my work like it was hers. He listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He took notes. When I finished, I felt drained, like I had poured out years of silence in 1 hour. He asked if I still had the patent documents. I nodded. He asked if I had records, drafts, timestamps, emails. I nodded again. He leaned back in his chair and said something that made my chest loosen for then. First time in months. Your NDA does not override your ownership of your intellectual property. It protects company discussions, not the work you created independently. They cannot take what is yours unless you give it to them willingly. I blinked at him, trying to absorb the meaning of his words. Daniel continued, "Families often confuse access with ownership. What you shared verbally does not erase your authorship. The patent filings are concrete, your timestamps are concrete. The work is legally yours." It was the first time someone outside my circle of research had recognized my work as something real, something worth protecting, not something to be dimmed or minimized or handed over for someone else's advancement. I asked him what I should do next. He said, "For now, nothing drastic. Keep records. Keep everything organized. Do not sign anything else under pressure. And most importantly, understand your leverage. Your work has value, whether your family acknowledges it or not." His words sat with me long after I left his office. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. People walked past carrying grocery bags and bundled children, their lives unfolding without the weight I carried. Yet I felt something shift inside me, a small but undeniable spark of agency. I drove back to Somerville with the window cracked open, despite the cold. I needed the air. I needed the reminder that the world outside my family was bigger than the rooms in, which I had spent years trying to belong. That night, I opened the proof folder on my laptop, added my notes from the meeting with Daniel, and reorganized every document by date. The act felt grounding, almost like reclaiming parts of myself I had handed away piece by piece. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that the future did not have to look like the past, that I did not have to shrink anymore. That truth, once spoken, had a way of reshaping everything around it. I closed the laptop and sat back, letting the quiet fill my small apartment. Thanksgiving had left an ache in me, but it had also left clarity. I could not keep living as the unnamed daughter in my own family. The path ahead was still dark, uncertain, full of things I could not yet see. But I knew one thing. I was done erasing myself so others could take the lead. And the next step in that journey was already waiting for me, just beyond the edge of that cold November night. Dad had barely finished speaking in that clipped, disappointed tone of his before the line went silent. And I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling that familiar heaviness rise in my chest again. But it did not crush me the way it used to. Not this time. Something in me had already shifted. I had heard too many versions of that same sentence in my life. You can come back when you apologize, when you behave, when you stop making things difficult, when you stop being you. I set the phone face down on my desk and exhaled slowly. I was done apologizing for existing. The summer sun poured through my apartment windows in Somerville, warm and bright, but it felt strangely disconnected from everything inside me. I had barely slept the night before, not because of fear, but because clarity has a way of shaking a person awake. By mid-afternoon, my sister called and asked if I could come by her office at Whitmore Industries in Greenwich. She said there was something urgent we needed to discuss. I knew the tone. I knew the urgency. I also knew it would have nothing to do with me and everything to do with what she needed from me. I made the drive back to Connecticut the next morning. The roads were crowded with weekend travelers, but I barely noticed the traffic. My mind replayed Daniel's voice telling me to hold my ground, to document everything, to stop handing my work away, because my family framed it as a responsibility. I remembered the way Mom had leaned in during Thanksgiving, telling me to not make people uncomfortable. The way Dad introduced me to guests as someone still figuring out her path. The way my sister said cute when she looked at something I made. All of it fed into the decision I had made long before I even walked through the doors of that office building. Whitmore Industries sat on a hill overlooking the harbor. Glass panels, white stone, manicured walkways. It was designed to impress people who cared about belonging to the right world. I stepped inside and followed the corridors until I reached the executive suite. My sister's assistant greeted me with a too bright smile and ushered me into a conference room. My sister was already seated at the head of the table, flipping through a binder filled with charts. She looked up and gave me a tight smile. You came. Her tone made it sound like she was surprised I still responded when summoned. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. What is this about? She closed the binder and folded her hands. Eliza, the company is facing a crisis. Investors are withdrawing. Contracts are slowing. This house of cards can fall at any moment. We need the algorithm. Your algorithm. The tone she used suggested she still believed the separation between my work and the company was negotiable. She leaned forward. You need to hand over everything you have. Every file, every update, all of it. No preamble, no courtesy, no acknowledgement of the years I had spent building something from nothing. It was a demand delivered as though she were asking me to pass the salt at dinner. I stayed quiet. She took that as an invitation to continue. Eliza, this will save the company. Think about what is at stake. Employees, partners, our reputation. If you care about the family at all, then you must do this. My chest tightened. The guilt rope she liked to hold over me had always been pulled with precision. I no longer felt compelled to grab the other end of it. I said I have already shared more than I should have. The algorithm belongs to me. The patent is under my name. The improvements are mine. I have documentation for every revision. She blinked, confused. I am not asking for ownership. I am asking for access. But that was not the truth, and we both knew it. She wanted control, not access. She wanted the algorithm in her hands so she could present it again as something she had shepherded into existence. Before I could say more, the conference door opened and Mom walked in. She closed the door behind her gently, as though trying to soften her arrival. She walked to the table and placed a hand on my sister's shoulder. Mom said your sister is under a lot of pressure. You know how hard your dad worked to build this company. We cannot let it fail. Family do not turn on each other. Families do not let each other fall. She paused so I could fill in the silence with guilt. Eliza, do not turn this into something legal. Do not make this ugly. Just help us. Help your sister. Help your father. Families do not take each other to court. She said those words with a softness that cut deeper than shouting ever could. It was the same tone she had used my entire childhood whenever she wanted me to. Fold quietly. I reached into my bag and pressed the record button on my phone. Massachusetts allowed one party to record their own conversations. I had learned that the night Daniel told me to protect myself. I placed my phone face down on the table and let my sister continue speaking. You signed an NDA, she reminded me, as if the agreement were a leash she could tighten at will. That means what you built belongs to the company. My voice was steady. The NDA I signed protects discussions within your company. It does not override federal intellectual property law. The patent predates your involvement by more than 1 full year. I have timestamps for every development milestone. You cannot take what is not yours. My sister's face reddened. This is not about credit, Eliza. This is about survival. I said no. One word. Soft. Clear. Final. Mom stepped closer. Eliza, listen to me. Do not destroy the family. We raised you. We supported you. You owe us something. I looked at her and realized something that felt like a door closing with a gentle click. They never wanted me to succeed. They wanted me to serve. They wanted me to stay small so they could stay elevated. I stood up and gathered my bag. I am keeping my work. That is final. My sister slammed her palm on the table just as I reached the door. You cannot do this. Investors already saw the preliminary model. They are expecting updates. They think I built the foundation. If you walk away, everything collapses. I said quietly, maybe it should. Then I walked out. Not quickly, not defiantly, just with the kind of calm that comes when the truth finally stops asking for permission to exist. The building's glass doors closed behind me with a soft thud. I stepped into the warm summer air and inhaled deeply. For a moment, I stood on the sidewalk, feeling nothing but the hum of distant traffic and the faint smell of ocean water drifting inland. The car ride back to Massachusetts was quiet. I did not play music. I did not call anyone. I let my mind sort through the conversation piece by piece, and every piece landed exactly where it belonged. I was done letting them use my silence as consent. That evening, my phone rang again. Dad's name lit up across the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. His voice was firmer than usual. Your sister called me. She said you made a scene. She said you refused to help. She said you walked out like a child. I said I did not make a scene. I told the truth. He sighed loudly, the kind of sigh that carried decades of disappointment he never hesitated to, direct toward me. Eliza, you owe your mother and sister an apology. This is not how a member of this family behaves. If you want to come back into this family, then you need to correct what you did today. Call your sister. Call your mother. Fix it. For a long moment, I said nothing. He waited. I think he expected me to fold the way I always had. He expected the old version of me, the one who apologized simply because the alternative was losing connection. But the version of me standing in my apartment that night had nothing left to offer. Blind obedience. Dad, I said calmly, I told the truth. I am not apologizing for that. Not today. Not again. He went silent. I could almost picture him gripping the phone, trying to process a daughter who no longer followed the script he believed was my responsibility. After a few seconds, he said, if you continue down this path, you will lose your family. Do you understand that? I looked around my small apartment. My books stacked neatly, My research notes are pinned to the wall, the quiet of a life I had built without their applause. I understood something very clearly. I said I already did. Then I hung up. The apartment felt still after the call, a stillness that was not lonely. A stillness that felt like the first breath after staying underwater too long. I walked to my desk, opened the proof folder, and added the recording from earlier. I wrote the date. I wrote what was said. I saved it all. Documentation did not erase the pain, but it gave me structure, something solid to stand on. Outside my window, the summer light had faded. The street lights flickered on one by one, casting a warm glow along the sidewalks. People walked by laughing, holding iced coffees, moving through their evenings with a lightness that felt miles away from the emotional gravity in my own life. But I felt steady. For the first time in years, I felt steady. The ultimatum had been given. The answer had been spoken. There was no going back to the version of me they once controlled, and I knew the next storm was coming. I could feel it in the air before it ever arrived. It showed up first in silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that has weight to it. The kind that settles over your life like a thin layer of frost. In early December of 2024, I noticed something subtle, almost easy to miss. I was not included in the group text about the annual Whitmore Christmas Eve dinner. My sister posted photos of garlands being hung around the Greenwich house. Mom shared a picture of the dining room, long white candles lining the center of the table. My dad posted a short video of the tree lighting. None of them reached out to me directly. No invitation, no mention that I was expected, no reminder of the dress code Mom insisted on every year. It was as if they had erased me. Not loudly, but by omission. And somehow that hurt more than if they had said outright that they did not want me there. On December 15th, I received a holiday card from a distant cousin. Inside, it said, "Hope to see you at the house on Christmas Eve." But when I wrote back to ask what time everyone was arriving, she replied a few hours later, saying she had assumed I was invited. She told me to check with my sister. I knew I would not. I already understood the answer. I read the newsletter 3 times before closing the document and letting out a long breath. This was not a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. An invitation that did not exist. A removal that was meant to feel clean and civilized. Still, something in me had grown stronger over the past months. The silence did not break me the way it once would have. Instead, it clarified the truth. Some doors close. Not because you failed, but because other people cannot tolerate what your existence reveals about them. 3 days later, an entirely different message arrived in my inbox. It was from a journalist named Megan Caldwell from an international business magazine. She said she had heard rumors about my work, about the research I had done at the Carver Institute, about a new medical technology moving toward approval. She said there was talk of an IPO on the horizon, and she wanted to speak with me for a feature scheduled to run on January 1st. My heart raced as I read her email again and again. My work, not my sister's. Not my family's company, mine. I waited an hour before replying, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to read my response with steady hands. When I finally wrote back, I asked what information she needed. She said she wanted to verify the timeline, confirm the patent records, and get a statement for the article. I sent her the patent registration from 2021, drafted explanations for each stage of development, and forwarded all documentation of my contributions. I also sent the recording from the meeting in June where my sister and Mom pressured me to hand everything over. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Megan. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the interest beneath it. She said the evidence was clear, the timeline impeccable, the originality undeniable. She asked if I felt comfortable being publicly credited as the creator and lead developer of the algorithm. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall as if the right answer might be written there. I said yes. She told me the feature was scheduled to be published exactly at midnight on New Year's Day. Years. That timing was intentional. She said investors would be watching for announcements the moment the year turned. Companies often released major news on January 1st at exactly 12 in the 8 morning. It created momentum for the coming quarter. If I was willing, she wanted my feature to be among them. When we hung up, I felt something shift inside me. A slow, steady alignment, like pieces clicking into place after years of being forced into the wrong pattern. The next step was legal confirmation. I forwarded everything to Daniel, including the email thread with the journalist. He responded within 30 minutes, asking me to come into his office the next morning. His office was quiet when I arrived. He motioned for me to sit and opened a folder that contained printed copies of every document I had sent him. He said nothing at first. He simply reviewed each page, tapping the corner of the papers with his finger as he read. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm. "Eliza," he said, "you have every legal right to publish. The NDA your family pushed onto you does not apply to this work. The work predates it. The patent predates it. The development is well documented. You can speak freely. You can publish freely, and no court in the country would stop you." I swallowed hard. Even though I knew this intellectually, hearing it from him felt like someone unlocking a door inside my chest. He said my sister would likely panic once the article was released. There might be accusations. There might be attempts to spin the narrative. But he reassured me that the truth had strength beyond what fear could manipulate. He said intellectual property law exists for situations exactly like this, where someone tries to claim what they did not create. Before leaving his office, I asked him one last question. If the article goes live at midnight, what happens next? He said simply, "The world adjusts to the truth." My final call was to my mentor at the Carver Institute, Dr. Helen Roth. She was the one who had encouraged me when I doubted my work, the one who pushed me to file the patent early, the one who reminded me that brilliance is often invisible in the wrong rooms, but undeniable in the right ones. When she answered, I felt my throat tighten. I told her everything, not just the technical part, but the personal part, the family part, the erasure, the exhaustion, the painful loyalty I had carried for too long. She listened quietly. When I finished, she said she would stand behind me. She would testify to the authenticity of the work. She would verify every detail if called upon. And then she said something that made my eyes sting. "It is time for people to know the truth, Eliza. You have spent your life building something real. Do not let the ones who refuse to see it control the story." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, letting her words settle. It was the first time someone had spoken to me as though my work deserved protection rather than sacrifice. In the days leading up to Christmas, I stayed busy finalizing files for Megan, verifying timelines, sending additional documentation she requested. The more we worked, the clearer the feature became. She sent me a draft on December 23rd. My hands shook as I scrolled through it. My name was printed at the top. My contributions are detailed. The development process explained. The timeline laid out with precision, and embedded throughout was the truth of what had happened, what I had created, what had been taken, what I refused to surrender. Christmas Eve arrived without a word from my family, not even a mass text. My sister posted a photo of herself in a red dress beside the decorated staircase. My dad posted a picture of the champagne tower. Mom posted a video of guests arriving. I watched each one without feeling like I was missing something. There is a difference between being excluded and being freed. By December 29th, Megan sent the final version of the article. She said everything was ready. All she needed was my final confirmation to schedule publication at exactly 12 in the morning on the first day of the new year. I thought long and hard about the moment, about what would happen when the clock struck midnight, about what it meant to speak publicly after spending a lifetime being told to be quiet. I thought about my sister presenting my work without blinking. I thought about him demanding I apologize if I wanted to be a member of the family again. I thought about Mom looking down at her hands instead of defending me. And then I clicked yes. The night of December 31st, I sat alone in my apartment, the lights low, the city outside glowing with anticipation. Midnight approached slowly, like a tide gathering its momentum. My heart beat steadily, not fast, not frightened, just steady. For the first time, I felt like the world was shifting into alignment with something I had always known deep down. I was done hiding. I was done being erased. I watched the clock tick toward the final minute. I felt the weight of everything behind me and the shape of everything ahead. The air felt different, dense with possibility. And as the seconds slipped toward the moment the year would turn, I breathed in and allowed myself one quiet thought. The truth is coming. I whispered that to myself as the final seconds of the year ticked away in my quiet Somerville apartment. Outside the window, the sky glowed with scattered fireworks crackling in the bilge. Distance, their colors bursting against the dark winter air. Inside the room, the only sound was the faint hum of my radiator and my own steady breathing. Midnight arrived, not with fanfare, but with a kind of solemn dignity that made my chest tighten. My phone buzzed at exactly 12 in the morning. It was an alert from the magazine's publishing system confirming the feature was live. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My name, my work, my story, all of it out in the world, no longer trapped inside a house that refused to acknowledge me. I felt a strange mixture of relief and grief, as if something had been released and something else had been lost forever. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, my hands trembling just enough that I had to steady the rim against the sink. At 12:01, the phone rang again. The screen lit up with my sister's name. I froze. For a moment, I considered not answering, but I picked up. Her voice was shaking. "Eliza, what did you do? Dad cannot breathe. Mom is screaming. People are still here. Everyone has seen it. What did you do?" I closed my eyes and leaned against the counter. I told the truth. She began talking fast, too fast, stumbling over her words. "You cannot do this. You cannot publish private things. Investors are calling. People are asking why the company said it was our work. Dad says he is calling the police. He is saying you trespassed on the property earlier today. He is furious. He is out for blood." I said quietly, "I never trespassed. You know that." She kept going as if she had not heard me. "He is out of control. He said you humiliated him. He said you embarrassed the family on the biggest night of the year. He is really calling the police, Eliza. They are on the way." Her panic washed over the line, but it did not enter me. Something in me had already anchored. I ended the call without arguing. I set the phone face down again and walked to the front closet where my coat hung. My breath steadied as I slipped my arms through the sleeves. If he wanted to involve the police, then the police could hear the truth. I picked up the proof folder from my desk drawer and slid it into my bag. Before leaving the apartment, I sent one short message to Daniel. "Dad called the police. Accusation of trespassing. At the house now." Seconds later, he responded, "I am on my way. Do not speak to anyone until I arrive." The roads were nearly empty as I drove through the winter night. The city's holiday lights shimmered along the edges of the highway. My tires hummed against the pavement, steady and soft. With every passing mile, my hands loosened their grip on the steering wheel. By the time I reached Greenwich, the tension in my chest had transformed into a cool, focused calm. When I pulled up to the house, the driveway was still lined with cars. The lights from the windows spilled across the front lawn, illuminating patches of snow. I could hear voices inside, raised and frantic. I took a slow breath and walked toward the door. Before I reached it, 2 police cruisers pulled into the driveway behind me. Their headlights washed over the house, casting sharp shadows. Officers stepped out, adjusting their jackets against the cold. Another car pulled in right after them. Daniel stepped out, dressed in a dark winter coat with a briefcase in hand. His expression was steady and unreadable. He walked toward me. "Are you ready?" I nodded. We approached the front door together. Before we could knock, it swung open. He stood in the doorway, his face red, his shirt collar undone. Behind him, I could see guests crowded in the foyer, some still holding champagne glasses, others whispering hurriedly. It looked chaotic, almost theatrical, like a scene in a play where the actors had lost control of the script. He jabbed a finger toward me. "Officers, that is her. She trespassed on my property earlier today. She has been causing problems. I want her removed immediately." One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, we will speak with everyone involved. Please step back." But he would not. He said, "I am the owner of this property. I have every right to have her arrested. She has no permission to be here. She has violated personal and private boundaries, and she is interfering with family business." Daniel spoke calmly. Officer, Mr. Whitmore is incorrect, legally and factually. My client committed no violation, but more importantly, Mr. Whitmore does not have ownership rights to this property. He has no standing to make a trespassing claim. My dad stared at him in confusion before turning redder. What are you talking about? This is my home. I have lived here for 30 years. You do not get to walk in here and tell me I have no rights to my own house. Daniel opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick envelope. Inside it were printed property records, title documents, and a notarized statement. He handed them to the officer. Officer, this house has been under the legal ownership of Mrs. Whitmore's mother since 2016. My client's grandmother. She purchased it outright and retained sole ownership. Mr. Whitmore is listed nowhere on the deed or the mortgage records. He cannot evict anyone, and he cannot file trespassing charges. He has no legal authority over the premises, despite living here. The officer flipped through the documents slowly. His face contorted. He looked toward the guests who had begun murmuring. His voice became shaky. That is impossible. That house was mine. I paid for it. Daniel's voice remained even. The records indicate otherwise. Your mother-in-law purchased it with funds from a trust. You have been living here with permission, but that permission is not tied to ownership. You cannot call the police on someone who has equal or greater standing than you. In fact, since my client was invited here previously, you cannot bar her entry without the actual owner's authorization. Guest leaned in closer. My sister appeared behind him, pale and wide-eyed. Mom stood a few feet away, gripping a napkin tightly, her shoulders trembling. No one spoke. The silence settled heavily in the foyer. My dad sputtered, trying to regain control. This is my house. I am in charge here, and she cannot come into my home and humiliate me. Daniel said respectfully, Sir, this is not your home, and any humiliation that is occurring is the result of your own misunderstanding of the law. My dad looked as if someone had slapped him. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again without sound. The officer handed the papers back. Mr. Whitmore, you cannot file a trespassing complaint on property you do not legally own. We cannot proceed with your request. My dad stepped back, his breathing sharp. His tie hung crooked. His cheeks were blotched. I had never seen him look so small in his own doorway. One of the officers turned to Daniel. You mentioned a second matter regarding your presence. Daniel nodded and removed a second envelope from his briefcase. Yes, officer. In addition to responding to the unfounded accusation, we are here to serve a civil action regarding intellectual property theft. My client is filing suit against Ms. Caroline Whitmore for misappropriation of proprietary research, including attempts to present patented material as her own in corporate settings. The gasp from the room was instant. My sister froze. Her mouth dropped open, her face draining of color as the officer stepped toward her. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Eliza, you would not. You cannot. We are family. I felt the words settle in the air, heavy with irony. Daniel handed the officer the documents, then repeated for clarity. My client is pursuing civil charges. These papers formally notify Miss Whitmore of pending litigation. This includes evidence of recordings, timestamps, patent filings, and her documented attempts to claim ownership of the technology in question. The officer approached my sister and said her name. She took a small step back, but there was nowhere to go. People parted around her, their eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. The officer placed the papers gently in her hands. She stared down at them like they were burning her. My dad lunged forward. You cannot serve papers in my home. You cannot do this in front of my guests. This is unacceptable. Daniel looked at him with calm precision. Legally speaking, sir, this is not your home. And yes, we can. My dad made a choking sound, as if he had swallowed something hard. He turned toward Mom, his voice cracking. Did you know about this? Did you know your mother still owned this house? But the question came out weak, almost childlike. Mom's lips parted, but no words came out. My sister clutched the papers with trembling fingers. She stared at me as though seeing me clearly for the first time in her life. Her voice was barely a whisper. You actually went through with this. I said I gave you 3 years to do the right thing. You chose not to. The foyer was silent again. Completely silent. Even the guests who had been whispering moments earlier stopped breathing audibly. The only sound in the entire house was the faint ticking of the antique clock in the hallway. He stood frozen. My sister looked shattered. Mom covered her mouth with her hand. One of the officers cleared his throat. We consider this matter resolved on the criminal side. There is no trespassing, no grounds for removal. We will file our report accordingly. Daniel nodded. Thank you, officers. His knees weakened and he gripped the edge of the entry table as if the room had tilted beneath him. The confidence he always wore like a shield had evaporated completely. Everything he had shouted earlier now hung heavy in the air, exposed and embarrassing. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence was so thick, it felt like it had its own gravity. And standing in the middle of that silence, I realized something. Truth does not need to shout to change a room. Sometimes, it only has to be spoken once. The officers left first, stepping back into the cold night. Daniel began packing his documents. I stood still for a moment longer, taking in the faces around me, the expressions shifting from judgment to confusion to something closer to disbelief. And then, the house fell completely quiet. A quiet so dense, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I turned away from them and stepped out into the night, letting the door close softly behind me. The cold night air followed me all the way to my car, sliding under my coat and settling against my skin like a second quiet truth. I did not look back at the house. I did not need to. The silence inside it had already said everything. I opened the door of my car, sat down, and let my hands rest on the steering wheel without starting the engine. My breath fogged the windshield. Somewhere down the street, fireworks were still going off. It felt strange to think that the rest of the world was welcoming a new year while mine had already broken open hours before midnight. I drove back to Somerville with the heater humming softly. My phone buzzed a few times, but I did not check it. I needed the world to stop asking things of me, even if just for a night. When I finally walked into my apartment, the radiator clicked on, warming the room with a low, familiar rumble. I hung my coat on the back of the chair, turned off all the lights except one lamp, and sat on the edge of the bed. The exhaustion hit me in a slow wave. I lay back without changing clothes and let my eyes close. I woke up to daylight pouring through the blinds. My phone was buzzing again and again. The clock said 9:30 in the morning. For a moment, I could not remember what day it was. Then everything returned in a sharp flash. New Year's Day, the article, the lawsuit, the police at the house, my dad shouting, sister holding the legal papers with shaking hands. My chest tightened. I reached for the phone. Notifications filled the screen. Missed calls, emails, a message from Daniel asking me to call when I was ready. A message from Dr. Alvarez saying he had read the article and his whole team at the Institute was proud of me. And dozens of alerts from news outlets reposting or discussing the feature. I sat up slowly. It was happening. The truth was out there, and it was not going back in the box. Around 10:30, I received my first call from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. This is Linda from Fairfield Public Broadcasting. We are covering the developing story about the Whitmore family and the intellectual property dispute. Would you like to comment? I said no thank you and hung up. The calls kept coming. Reporters, analysts, people from biotech firms, even someone from a talk show. I ignored them all. I was not ready to let the world become part of this. Not yet. Around noon, my sister held a press conference. I did not watch it live, but someone sent me a clip an hour later. I watched it on mute first, then with the sound on. She stood behind a podium with the company logo behind her. She looked tired. Her eyes were puffy, as if she had not slept at all. She started with a trembling breath. The situation has been blown out of proportion. My sister and I have worked closely for years. We have supported each other. Any misunderstandings about intellectual contributions are a matter of internal communication. Our family has always valued collaboration. A reporter immediately raised a hand. Ms. Whitmore, did you or did you not present your sister's patented work as your own to your board and investors during multiple internal meetings? She blinked, swallowed, and attempted a smile. The specifics of that timeline are more complex than what the public understands. Another reporter interrupted. The patent was filed in early 2019 under your sister's name. Yet your first presentation claiming the same methodology took place in late 2020. How do you explain this discrepancy? My sister shifted again. Her voice cracked slightly. As I said, the timeline is complex. We are clarifying all details with legal counsel. A third reporter stepped forward. Ms. Whitmore, there is an audio recording in which you told your sister that everything she made belonged to the company and that she had no right to hold any intellectual property independently. Do you deny the authenticity of that recording? Her cheeks were drained of color. I could almost hear her thinking. The team is reviewing all evidence. The room filled with murmurs. Another reporter said softly, Ms. Whitmore, were you aware that the house where last night's incident occurred is owned by the grandmother, not your father? My sister stiffened. I cannot comment on personal matters. Someone added, Miss Whitmore, what is your response to allegations that you misled investors about the origins of the technology? She closed her eyes for a moment, then abruptly ended the conference. The clip cut off there. I let the phone fall onto the couch cushion. I felt a strange ache in my chest. Not satisfaction, not victory, but something more complicated. For so long, the world had believed that she was the talented one, the bright one, the natural heir to our family's legacy. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into the space they left me. Now the world was asking her questions she could not answer. It was not revenge, not exactly. It was simply truth catching up. That afternoon, the board of Whitmore Diagnostics announced a temporary suspension of my sister's leadership role pending an internal investigation. Stocks dipped. A major hospital contract worth $15 million was frozen. An article from a medical journal surfaced, questioning the accuracy of the company's prior claims. By evening, I received an email from an employee I had met years earlier. He said he was afraid for the future of the company because people depended on those jobs to support their families. His message ended with, "Please, if there is anything you can do, please help." I sat with that for a long time. I did not want anyone losing their livelihood because of the choices my family made. But the truth had consequences. Consequences do not argue. They do not negotiate. They arrive when they are ready. The next morning, I walked to the coffee shop near my apartment. The air smelled like snow, even though none had fallen. The streets were quieter than usual. I ordered a latte and waited by the window. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed again. It was a call from my mom. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was thin. "Eliza, can we talk?" I said yes, and she asked if we could meet somewhere neutral. We chose a small cafe near Cambridge that she used to like. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table. She looked smaller somehow, as if her frame had curled inward overnight. She stirred her tea without looking up. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. I sat down across from her. She kept stirring the tea, even though it no longer needed it. Her eyes finally rose to meet mine. "Everything is falling apart. Your sister is devastated. Your dad is furious. The board is demanding explanations. People we know are asking questions. This is hurting our family." I waited for her to finish. She took a breath. "We need to get ahead of this. If you could release a statement saying the article overstated things or that the lawsuit was a misunderstanding, it would calm everything down. You would still get recognition for what you did, and the family would not be destroyed by this." I watched her carefully. For a moment, I almost felt like a child again, waiting for her to choose me, to defend me, to see me. But that moment passed. I said, "I am not lying for you." She flinched visibly. "Eliza, please, this is your family. We built everything with our reputation. If you keep pushing this, we will never recover." I rested my hands on the table. "Mom, I told the truth. That is all. If your reputation cannot survive the truth, then it was never real." Her eyes filled with tears. "You sound just like your grandmother." I almost smiled at that, but not unkindly. Grandma had always believed in standing firm, even when it cost her everything. Maybe I had inherited that. My mom lowered her voice. "Your sister is considering making a public apology. She is devastated. She feels betrayed. The words echoed between us. I was betrayed by what? By the fact that her actions finally had consequences. By the fact that she cannot take my work and still be praised for it. Or by the fact that I finally refused to be quiet. My mom closed her eyes. You do not understand how hard this is on her. I leaned back in my chair. Maybe you do not understand how hard the last 10 years were on me. She looked at me then. Really looked, as if she was seeing the shape of my hurt for the first time. But the recognition did not stay long. It never did. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Please help us fix this. We cannot survive the humiliation. I gently pulled my hand back. Humiliation is not fatal. Losing myself was. I will not give that up again. She took a shaky breath and nodded, as if she understood something she wished she had not heard. She stood up without finishing her tea. Before she walked away, she said quietly, "You are choosing pride over family." I answered, "No, I am choosing truth over silence." She left the cafe. For the rest of the week, the fallout continued. More journalists dug into the story. Analysts questioned how long the company had relied on misattributed research. Alumni from the institute posted congratulations on my patent recognition. People I had not spoken to in years sent me messages of support. On the 5th of January, the board made an announcement. My sister's suspension was extended. The internal review would continue for several weeks. Shares dropped again. A medical organization announced they were reconsidering future collaborations. A popular news anchor reported that investors were demanding accountability. That evening, my sister called. Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. She said she needed to talk in person. There was something she wanted to tell me, something she needed to decide. I told her I would think about it. After we hung up, I walked to the window of my apartment. The city lights flickered like restless thoughts. The air outside was cold. But inside the room, I felt a strange settling. For the first time in my life, my family did not get to decide the narrative. The world was not seeing me through their lens anymore. They were seeing me as I was. And the truth, once spoken, was doing exactly what truth does. It was moving. It was working. It was reshaping everything in its path. I knew this story was not finished. My sister was not done. My family was not done. There would be more conversations, more fallout, more decisions to make. But for the first time, I felt steady, even hopeful. I stayed by the window that night, watching the Boston lights flicker against the winter sky, wondering how many years I had spent trying to belong to people who never once wondered whether they belonged to me. The thought was quiet but sharp, like a thread pulling itself free. I let it settle. For the first time in my life, the world felt larger than the walls my family built around me. The next morning brought a kind of stillness I had not felt in years. I woke without dread. I made coffee without rushing. The city outside was slow and soft under a layer of pale light. When I checked my phone, I saw a voicemail from my sister. Her voice sounded worn, almost fragile. She said she wanted to meet. She said she needed to talk in person. She said she wanted to apologize. I did not answer right away. I walked around my apartment with the message echoing in my mind. A year earlier, I would have leapt at the chance. A year earlier, I would have carried hope like a weight, believing that if I behaved perfectly, if I explained carefully, if I softened myself enough, maybe they would see me. Maybe they would choose me. But things are different now. The truth had entered the room and refused to leave. And once truth breathes, nothing goes back to the way it was. We eventually met at a small park near the Charles River, the one with the long benches that faced the water. My sister stood waiting by the railing. She wore a long coat, and her breath fogged the air in short bursts. When she turned toward me, she looked nothing like the woman who had clapped when my dad threw me out. Her eyes were red and tired. For once, there was no audience, no posture, no performance. She said, "Thank you for coming," and her voice cracked on the first word. I sat on the bench. She sat beside me, leaving a polite distance. For a long time, she said nothing. Then the words spilled out. I read everything: the patent files, the emails, the timestamps, the recordings. I did not want to believe it. I kept thinking there had to be some other explanation, something that made me look less like the villain in my own sister's life. But there is not. I did this to you. I stole from you. I erased you, and I let myself believe it was fine because we share a last name. Her hands trembled as she rubbed them together for warmth. You were always good at things I struggled with. You saw connections no one else saw. You created things that made people pause. I was jealous. I thought if I could take what you made and wrap it in my smile, people would see me the way they saw you. I am sorry, Eliza. I am so sorry. The apology hung in the air, cold and fragile. I listened quietly. She waited. Finally, I said, I appreciate your apology. I really do. But an apology does not erase the years or the choices or the damage. It only acknowledges it. She nodded. I know. I do not expect anything. I just needed to say it. We sat there for a while. Two women at the edge of a river, trying to understand the shape of a wound. Eventually, she told me she planned to resign completely. She said the board was preparing a statement. She said she would make her own. She wanted to own her choices publicly, not because the world demanded it, but because she could not live with herself otherwise. When she stood to leave, she paused. You deserved better than us. I hope life gives you as much space as you give it. I watched her walk away. I did not feel triumph or satisfaction. What I felt was a soft ache, the kind you get when something finally breaks open and begins to heal. The months that followed moved quickly. By February, my work had attracted the attention of a research hospital in Baltimore. They wanted to collaborate on a diagnostic program using early-stage detection models. Meetings were long, but energizing. For the first time, I felt like people were speaking to me, not around me, not through me, but directly to me. They saw me, not who I was supposed to be for my family, but who I actually was. By spring, I launched my own company out of a renovated loft in Cambridge. I hired researchers from different corners of the field, people who were curious, humble, and eager to build something honest. We held team meetings in a sunlit room with a long wooden table and mugs that never matched. Some days, we failed. Some days, we stumbled onto breakthroughs that made us shout across the room. It was messy and human and exactly right. My dad tried calling once in April. The voicemail was short. He said he wanted to discuss misunderstandings. He said the family needed to heal. He said reputations could be rebuilt if I cooperated. I never returned the call. My mom reached out more gently. She sent emails instead of demands. She asked how I was doing. She asked if she could visit. I did not say no, but I did not say yes. Instead, I said, we can talk, but only if we speak honestly. No image management, no pretending. She agreed. And for the first time in my life, we had a conversation that did not circle around my silence. She did not defend what happened. She did not minimize it. She simply said she was sorry she did not protect me better when I was young, and that she had been afraid of conflict for so long she did not realize her silence became its own form of violence. The words were imperfect, but real. I forgave her, not in a dramatic moment, not in a single breath, but slowly, over the course of many conversations. Forgiveness took shape like a new language I was learning, one I had not grown up speaking. It did not mean returning to the past. It meant acknowledging it without letting it hold me anymore. By summer, my company signed its first major contract with a medical center in Seattle. The deal was worth several $1 million and would expand early diagnostic access for thousands of patients. I celebrated with my team by ordering takeout and eating on the floor because we had not bought enough chairs yet. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. In the fall, I was invited to speak at a Women in STEM conference in Chicago. The room was filled with young researchers, older scientists, women who had been silenced, overlooked, underestimated. I told them my story. Not the scandal version, not the headline version, but the human one. The one where a girl learned to shrink to survive, then learned to unshrink to live. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then they stood and clapped for so long I had to blink back tears. December arrived faster than I expected. Snow dusted the sidewalks. My office was warm with buzzing heaters and holiday snacks. My team wrapped up our last project of the year and exchanged small gifts, mostly inside jokes written on sticky notes. Life felt full in a way I had never known, full of people who saw me without needing me to be smaller, full of work that reflected my mind instead of someone else's need to own it, full of breath, full of possibility. On the morning of December 31st, 2025, I woke up in a soft pool of sunlight. I made coffee, wrapped myself in a sweater, and walked to the office, even though the building was officially closed. I liked being there when it was quiet. The big windows overlooked the city. The lights shimmered over the river. It felt peaceful. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. Not a party, just a group of people who had become my people, my team. A few friends from the Institute, even my mom, who arrived early and helped slice fruit in the kitchen. We talked about work and books and the strange joy of finding community later in life. We sat on the floor with plates in our laps. It was nothing like the parties my family used to host, the ones where everyone smiled but no one breathed. This was different. This was alive. A little before midnight, I stepped onto the balcony for a moment alone. The sky above Boston was dark and soft. The sound of laughter drifted from inside. I held a glass of champagne and let the cold air settle around me. 1 year earlier, I had stood outside my parents' house with nothing but my coat and my dignity. 1 year earlier, I had been locked out and erased. Now I stood in a life I built myself. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister. Happy New Year. I am doing better. I hope you are too. Thank you for being honest when I was not brave enough to be. I typed back a simple, Happy New Year, and put the phone away. Inside, someone began counting down from 10. I walked back in and joined the circle. Voices rose, laughter tangled with hope. When the room erupted at midnight, I felt something open in me. A soft, steady warmth. Not belonging had once felt like a wound. Now it felt like a beginning. When the noise settled, I raised my glass slightly and said quietly, more to myself than anyone else, I exist. Fully. Finally, and if you have ever been told that you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.